if you need to see a human, then that's a design problem in the bank.
Next, what comes after a super app?
That doesn't make sense. Why would I need to do that? You can scan your mouth with the camera. It looks like a toothbrush. But
the capitalism will still be based on consumption, right?
Right, yeah, right. But then you realize the absurdity of that is that if I have to give you a salary so you keep consuming to keep capitalism alive.
Yeah, and maybe they will not do proper IPOs, but there will be a QR that says, like, if you want to become an owner, you just scan, and if there is coins available, you just buy whatever amount you want. Dear friends, welcome to the next episode of the AIFC Special Podcast. I'm Renat Bekturov, the governor of Astana International Financial Center, and today I have a special, very special guest, the Futurist, the author behind Bank 20304050, and author of the podcast Breaking Banking. So this will be probably more like a joint podcast with Brett King. It's actually an interesting story how I've met Brett, right?
Yes.
It was on an event in Baku last year, so we by accident met in the elevator, actually, right?
Yeah.
And just started
and then we ended up going in the car together somewhere, right? Didn't we?
Yes, on one of the receptions, right?
Yes.
And then we had the discussion about AI, about future of workforce, and that's the topics I hope we can discuss today.
Fortuitous.
And then I thought, like, why not to bring you to Kazakhstan so that you can share your vision with the local audience of the participants of Astana Finance Days, and great that you could make it. This podcast, by the way, is being recorded during the Astana Finance Days 2025, which we already had the first day, and today is the second day. So, Brett, welcome. First of all, welcome to Kazakhstan. Welcome to Astana.
No, it's been a wonderful visit. I got a lot of great energy from the event. You've had obviously some very high profile players at the event, the Deputy Prime Minister, advisors to the Economic Ministry and so forth. And the sessions have been very insightful. There's a lot of potential here, clearly.
Yeah, how many times before you've been to Kazakhstan or CIS, like in general?
This is only my second visit. I was in Almaty before, but this is my first visit to Astana, and very impressive setup you have here. And I do think the fundamentals are very strong in the market, and I think that's one of the aspects that I've learned on this trip specifically. Got a very healthy environment potentially for direct foreign investment. The infrastructure is the investment in infrastructure has obviously been quite solid the last few years, and I think that holds you in good stead. And there are good, clear opportunities here.
Yeah, and Brett, by the way, is not just an author and a futurist. He's also a businessman. So he based in number of jurisdictions like UAE, like Dubai.
Yes.
So probably the IFC. I'm sure Singapore, right? Those peer jurisdictions that we used to benchmark ourselves, and now I think we are both peers, friends, and at some point maybe also competitors, right, for the global business. So I'm sure you have experience and can compare AIFC as a jurisdiction to others, right?
No, I think I think in terms of the fundamentals, economically, you have a very good balance sheet, as we were discussing at the event this morning. Low debt to GDP ratio. You've got natural resources in the country. You have a close connection with China in terms of the manufacturing and investment here. So I think there's definitely strong potential generally in the market. I guess the question is sort of digital readiness, and this is what we've been discussing at the Astana Finance Days the last couple of days. But obviously there's also strong technical competency here, and that promises some level of competency.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have assets, like you said. We're endowed with natural resources. We're endowed with interesting talent and high human capital. It's about providing investment so that these assets are liquid and they're properly valued and actually properly unlocking their value. And of course, the financial system is the blood vessel, right? And that's what we trying to develop. And banking plays an important role in the flow of capital and also for the individuals, right? I mean, that's I think like banking. I'm sure you know, right, how banking have rapidly changed in last few decades. For example, in your Bank 4.0, you said that the banks will be seamless like a texting, right? And which already happened. We discussed that we bank in China. We have our own Kaspi, KZ, huge success, KZ, Freedom. Everyone is doing like super apps banking. So everything now in the app, right? I can shop, I can get a loan, even I can get government services at the bank. So it's already there. But in your so what's the next? And in your Bank 5.0, you talk about now about fintechs and AI-based models that challenge the bank. So can you elaborate on that idea? So what the bank should expect next? What comes after a super app?
That's actually interesting. So let me start by, I have a book coming out September 15th. So this podcast will probably air after that's been launched, but it's called Branch Tomorrow. And it's the first publication globally that identifies peak branch globally in terms of banking. And that was in 2015. And we measured that by looking at the G20 and the Eurozone, which have the largest density of branches historically, and seeing how that has declined over the last decade. This is not data that you normally see reported with central banks, because obviously there's sensitivity about saying that the mainstream banks are declining in terms of branch investment. The UK and other markets like that have had a lot of debate around the social need for a branch infrastructure. But what has flipped there is the dominance of fintechs in our day-to-day banking environment. So Branch Tomorrow identifies that if you take the top 20 retail fintechs versus the top 20 banks, you get a very clear picture of how things have changed over the last decade. And today, the top 20 retail fintechs command about 4.1 billion customers. The top 20 retail banks have about 2.7 billion customers. So the fintechs literally have 50% more market share for day-to-day retail banking than traditional incumbents. And the reason that's happened so quickly is a fundamental shift in the way of scaling laws, essentially. And AI is going to accelerate this. But the fastest growing financial institutions in the world today all are able to acquire customers at digital scale. So very low cost of acquisition, and able to do that through the technology layer. So you mentioned WeBank. There's Nubank, the largest bank outside of Asia now, based out of Brazil. Chime in the US, Revolut, who will be sometime this decade the largest retail bank in Europe, etc. And their cost of acquisition is 1/100th almost of what you see from mainstream incumbent banks in countries like the US or in regions like the Eurozone. And so that has fundamentally changed the economics of banking. And when we want to look at the most efficient banks today, you have to look at those based on this sort of pure technology platform.
Yeah, fully agree. The economics is important, right? And then if you can run a bank without the physical branch, that costs your expenses hugely, right? And then if you also manage it as an IT company focused on the acquisition cost, that makes it different. But there is also maybe one virtue that the traditional banks have is this human interaction. And, you probably noticed during AFD, we have discussed talked about the issue of trust, right? And then trust happens between human beings, right? I mean, it's a social phenomenon, right?
Sure.
So there is an argument, right, that people still want to see the banker, look him in the eyes, talk and etc., which requires physical presence, which means like your branch, right? How, I guess, and then we can let's go in the whole.
Well, I'm willing to debate this with you, but
of trust, right? And how in a digital economy trust is built and trust is nurtured.
So this is where you have this generational shift taking place.
So you're saying I'm old school?
No. Well, I mean, like you can't get to being the governor of the AIFC unless you're a little bit old school, right? I will say that when we look at this phenomenon globally and we look at players like Nubank and WeBank, or Alipay may be a better example, and MyBank in China, it's interesting that for the majority of customers now in China, they would have a higher trust rating of Alipay versus, say, ICBC or Agricultural Bank of China. And that's taken a while, but essentially the reason Alipay has that level of trust is the utility they provide around banking. So think of it this way. The reason I trust a banker face-to-face in this interaction is because I feel like if I can get to a human that understands the system, they can fix the problem that I might have. But Henry Ma, who's the CIO of WeBank, who I know you've met his team, Henry has a very interesting take on this, which he says, if you need to see a human, then that's a design problem in the bank. Right? Because these days, with the technology we have and the ability to build these seamless experiences, you should just be able to solve the problem, whatever money problem it is, for the customer in real time. Access to credit, encouraging them to save money, these sort of behavioral or experiential things. If that process breaks and you need to see a human to unlock the value, then that's a design failure in his view. So WeBank, as an example, has been able to eliminate 98% of human interaction with AI and better design, patterns in the bank. The other element of this is there's a behavioral shift here in terms of the way Gen Zs and alphas and to some extent millennials choose financial services, and they've been influenced by the digital environment. So instead of thinking about, well, I'm going to go to this bank and establish a relationship with this bank and it will unlock all of this banking utility over time, like access to a mortgage or a credit card or whatever, they think of banking like they think of apps. What is the app that I need to solve this problem? What is who is the financial services provider I can do to get to buy a car? Who would I need to speak to about helping me buy an apartment? They don't think about sort of this total or primary banking relationship that we've had in the past. So that also tends much more towards this utility function. So what we're seeing right now is that trust in bank brands is shifting away from the charter of the bank, the capital adequacy, how many branches you have, to what utility can you provide so I can solve my financial problems in real time, when and where I am. That's really the shift that's taking place.
Yeah, I like the point you said that it alludes to they think it as an app, right? And in the apps, the popular ones, they have, and they're really like startups always think about UI and UX, right? So
yes.
User experience. So we're kind of putting this comfort or better user experience over the measures you mentioned, right? Like a capital adequacy
yes.
and etc. But to me, it sounds like it's more on the surface, right? I mean, and this may happen, like bank runs or crashes happen. People will understand that the below the surface of experience and how nice it looks and gamification, you actually need a risk mitigation and deeper understanding of the business itself and what is leverage means and etc. Right?
But isn't the very fact that the utility of that bank, the ability to make payments, to access credit, all of those, the ability to send money, the ability to safely store your money, all of that core utility, that if that works flawlessly every time, then I can sort of put aside those other issues at the back end unless I have a very technical understanding or requirement of understanding the bank. And that's really what we've seen in places like Latin America with Nubank and China with WeBank. Put it this way. If trust in a bank was dependent on a human interaction, and knowing that you could always get to a human, WeBank would not be the largest bank in Latin America. Nubank would not be the largest bank in Latin America. In fact, the largest bank outside of Asia. WeBank wouldn't have 450 million customers, because that would have impeded their growth. So I think that's really what we're seeing is if you can, customers ultimately don't care if there's a human involved, if you can just fix my problem, if you can get me the solution I need. And this is where digital pure plays who've designed that experience to be embedded in your life and seamless and very efficient, are showing an advantage. Because now if a bank says, oh, you need to come down and see a human and you need to sign this piece of paper, a digital native will be going, that doesn't make sense. Why would I need to do that? And if you argue, well, you can trust us more, it's like, well, no, but I mean, I trust the utility of the bank. If you can provide me this in real time, when I need it, then that's really what I'm looking for from the bank, So I think that's where the evidence points to right now, that there's a fundamental shift in trust emerging around utility.
I also think it's about like what we used to, about our habits, right? I think in terms of changing our habits, the lockdown played a kind of big role,
big
right?
role. COVID,
like what you're saying in terms of branches now shrinking, number of branches shrinking. Before COVID, everyone thought, okay, it's gonna happen, but when it's gonna happen, we don't know. People still like coming to the branches.
Sure.
Same at the workplaces. Like, of course, we had all the tools like Teams and etc. You could do like conferences, video, but nobody used this. People still would like to come together, or it was just a habit of the management, right? But then COVID just forced us all as a humankind to shift that to more digital era, right? I think.
Well, I think where it's really interesting is COVID has given us a glimpse of what life in the AI world is going to be like, right? Very digital, access to healthcare, education, financial services digitally without requiring that sort of physical infrastructure. I mean, on healthcare side, we are getting AI-based diagnostics that are going to be better than most doctors very quickly. I'm working on a dental startup right now where we have a camera that you can, an intraoral camera, where you can scan your mouth with the camera. It looks like a toothbrush, and we can detect cavities. So 70% of people only go to the dentist when they have a pain in their tooth or an emergency. But by then, the damage has been done. So we now have access to technology that can easily diagnose these sorts of problems well before you could go into a human interaction. And the same is true for education and financial services as we evolve. COVID gave us a glimpse into that. Then when we start looking at this sort of embedded AI layer, your personal AI helping you through your life and so forth, we are going to delegate our AI agent within the next couple of years. This is going to be reality where, for example, I'm going to send my AI agent off to tell me how to get access to an autonomous vehicle service, right? Get me the best price on a EV service that I can subscribe to, or get me the best pricing for home financing that I could do. And your agent will go off and find the solution to that and come back with you and report on what's easier. Same would be true of if you want to improve your health, or you want to subscribe to longevity services, which we were discussing the other day. All of this essentially will be, your agent will go out and look after that. So COVID was just an early glimpse into this. And the problem is, if people need to see a human to get access to those services in the future, that's going to become more and more difficult because, first of all, the best doctors are going to have the best data on you, your genome, your historical blood work, all of those things combined with AI to give you a high level of personalized service. And if you are going to the doctor as you do today, and the doctor says, well, what are your symptoms? They're working off very, very limited information compared with what we will see emerge in the AI world. And the same is true for banking and financial services.
That, I think, the idea you described in your book, Augmented Life in Smart Lane, right? That our kids, the next generation, will be living in a different life. And you put like all these technologies in a place like Uberization, right?
Yes.
That people will not own anything anymore, that they will shared economy.
Right.
Even though I think that the discussion about shared economy now is a little bit muted than a few years ago, right? I mean, it's a kind of going away maybe. But AI, this personalized AI, personalized data, which we have yesterday discussed, is definitely gonna change their life, right?
Okay.
We already can see from our children their patterns as a consumers is different, right? The way they shop is different, which leads me to thinking. I have 5 kids, right? From 14 to 1.5, and from the older ones, I can already see that they treat money differently. They look at it differently, right? So, how do you think we as a parents now should educate our kids about the finance, about the personal finance?
It's a challenge.
Yeah, especially like what our parents thought of is different, right?
Yes.
We never thought about, like, especially like for us, people coming from the CIS, we had like one currency for everyone, right? So we never, like when I was kid, before high school and before independence, we never talked about currencies because personally, I didn't even know there are many different currencies. But my kids, like even the small ones, they know that there is a dollar, there is tenge, right? But the older ones now, they know that there are cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
Again, this like, I'm not saying it complicates for them. It actually makes it even more interesting, more vibrant. So any thoughts? How do you talk about money with your kids?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think everything's going to change in their lifetime. And this gets into more economic theory. But if you look at, I was in, where was I the other day? I was in an airport somewhere, and they had a copy of Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith's foundational book on capitalism. And I opened it to the first page, right, which is the opening comments. And it very clearly ties it to that capitalism is tied to human capital, human labor. And of course, if you think about Economics 101, supply and demand, the principles always be as demand for a product increases, we have to increase supply. How do we do that? We put more people on the factory floor. But AI is fundamentally going to break that, right? Because wherever possible, we'll use automation in the ability to create supply rather than human labor. And I think most of the AI leadership, Sam Altman, Demis Hassabis, and others like this, Jeffrey Hinton, have talked about the impact of AI on employment and the risk there. And so the current working theory is that we're going to have something like universal basic income, which will be a sort of an income that will pay everybody based off the huge profits and capital that's generated by AI, so that we can keep humans consuming and keep capitalism going. But
the capitalism will still be based on consumption, right?
Right, yeah, right. But then you realize the absurdity of that is that if I have to give you a salary so you keep consuming to keep capitalism alive, that can't continue for more than maybe a couple of decades, because we have to change our view of consumption. And so what you probably will see with artificial intelligence, and Elon Musk just came out with Tesla's fourth vision for the future, and it really reinforces this, which is AI should be able to give us ubiquitously across the population a very high level of basic service, access to education, healthcare, housing, food, clothing, etc., for free, essentially, because there's so much abundance created by automation that you don't need to go out and pay for those things, right? So then what is left in terms of the value of money? What remains is the experience economy. And so, you will have, you'll be able to get a basic standard of living by 2050 without having, a job as we think of it today. But if you want to have experiences at a high level, you want to have longevity treatments, you want to have, you want to travel, on orbital space flights and things like that, you're still going to need monetary resources for that level of experience or consumption. So it's a little bit more complicated than what we are used to. And I think, we're going to have new economic thinking or a new economic theory that is post-capitalist. Now, doesn't mean we're going to socialism or communism, because that's still rearward looking. It's some sort of new techno-optimal, economic system that focuses, that the economy is focused on the standard of living for every citizen first and foremost, and then corporate returns and economic returns secondary. There's a very clear picture emerging from economists today that because of what's happening with AI and climate and other things, that we will enter a degrowth period of economics in the 2040s and 2050s. So this means that GDP growth will no longer be, a core emphasis of economies, that it will be more internally focused on using the capital growth that's coming because of these technological advances to raise the standard of everyone's life in the economy. But that's not by raising the amount of money people absorb. It's just by raising access to basic services.
That actually brings us to the question that we already have discussed in that car, right? So if you have sort of a universal basic cover of your needs, right?
Yes.
Then what's the motivation to work, or what happens with the workforce in general, right?
Yeah.
So there might be a group of people, and quite a big group of people, they say like, this is enough for me. I'm not doing anything. I'm just playing all day and eating, right? But then again, I will not say that this is important for our kids, even though it is. But in general, like, what does happen with the workforce? Why would anyone would work anyways?
Yeah. Well, I think this is really important. Is if you take away the concept of you have to work to survive or you have to work to live, and those basic needs are catered for, then the argument from capitalists is everyone will sit on the couch, they'll sit in Mark Zuckerberg's VR world or whatever, and so forth. But we've now have some pretty good data on UBI trials globally. There's been over 70 universal basic income trials globally. And what we find is that people who receive universal basic income, they start their own businesses at 3 times the rate of the general population. We know that incidence of mental health drop by half when people have UBI, so 40% decline in mental health issues, almost half. And we also see that people get much more involved in community-related activities. So the nature of work changes. The nature of work changes from being about economic economic unit, economic activity, to being about something you're passionate about or that you find meaningful. So in 20 or 30 years, Renat, when I ask you, what do you do? Your answer about your profession is not tied to economic performance. It's tied to something that you believe in, that you feel you can make a difference. What we don't see an indication of right now in the data of these UBI trials is that people stop working. Because work is a very sort of core philosophical human need to provide value. Yes, some people won't work, right? Or they'll work less, and I think we'll all probably work less in the future. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But Dave Shapiro, who's a futurist out of the west coast of the US, he calls it the meaning economy, that we shift to the meaning economy. And I think that's a better way of sort of thinking about it.
Yeah, if you think about it also from the perspective of Maslow's pyramid of needs,
Yes.
So people work to cover first the bottom, like basic needs, security, and etc., and then you move up. So we're saying like we'll be able to cover the first few layers just at no cost, right?
Exactly.
Then you kind of working for the next, which the top one is like exactly self-actualization, right?
Exactly,
meaning that like you're finding your purpose in life.
No, I mean, I've used Maslow's hierarchy, to debate this in my books. It was in Augmented, it was in Rise of Technosocialism. But I think actually what AI will do for us is force a philosophical shift of humanity, because AI is going to give us like these superpowers to do these amazing things. And climate impact is going to change, global priorities. Despite the current US administration's position on this, there's sort of clear evidence we're going to have to make some adaptation for humanity at scale. So as this occurs, and longevity, we could be living to 150 or older. As this occurs, we have to make some philosophical changes. What does it mean to be human in this environment when, that survival of the fittest mantra that we've thought of, that risk becomes less, that the risk to our well-being and our health and our economic stability, with those issues less critical, then, what is it that humans want to accomplish? What are these tools that we have, these new tools? What are they going to allow us to do? It's no longer about survival. It's now about, what is the potential of humanity as a species? That's the sort of philosophical question that emerges out of that. It's a lot bigger than talking about core economics and, listing of companies on the AIX and things like that, right?
A little going back to the technology, not the philosophical questions. I know you're a strong believer in AI, as you're already saying that this is going to literally disrupt how we live and give us superpowers. But the people who argue, right, that the current state of the technology we have, basically like computing based on binomial system with the zeros and ones, is just not ready to unlock the full potential of AI, right? I mean, you know what I mean, right?
Sure.
We kind of started talking about it yesterday during the opening
quantum,
to the quantum. Yeah, for the audience who may not know what is quantum computing, maybe you can talk about it a little bit more, and then how that technology you think will disrupt AI, which disrupt everything else, right?
Well, there's two elements to this. First is quantum, and then how AI itself is evolving. So for a quantum computer, when we talk about classical computing, you're right, it's binary, ones or zeros. But quantum processors or quantum chips have a quantum state, so we call it a qubit. And so, that means that any one bit, a quantum bit, can have multiple states, 3 or 4 at least multiple states. We call it quantum superposition. And that means that then you have exponentially more compute power. So to illustrate, mathematical problems that would take a classical computer, 1 billion years to solve, you could solve, on a quantum computer in hours or days. So this really changes the ability of us to use compute power for solving big problems. So understanding the universe, the nature of the universe, understanding physics at a deep level, understanding how different dimensions operate, solving all cancers, coming up with new metamaterials that will give us much more efficiency in manufacturing, new technologies that will advance the species. All of this could be unlocked by this qubit architecture. Already we're seeing some significant advances with this. At the same time, you have what's happening with AI, which is a form of compressed intelligence. And Geoffrey Hinton speaks about this at length, of course. But with these models, and the artificial neurons we've created in these LLMs, we call them perceptrons at the heart of the backward propagation system. But these artificial neurons work in much the same way as our brain chemistry works today, but much more efficiently. So you'll be able to have an AI that will have less neuronal connections, but be more efficient than a human brain in coming up, with the same logical reasoning. And as those AI models get more powerful, we get much more compressed intelligence, which means we can produce much higher order thinking without as much energy or without as many human brains attached to it. When you combine quantum and AI in that state, you're then getting what we call super intelligent applications and the ability to do things that are well beyond the current capabilities of humans. And we call this artificial superintelligence. So this we expect to emerge sometime over the next decade or two. We'll have reliable quantum computing platforms within the next 5 years or so. And of course, we expect to see artificial general intelligence emerge sometime in the next couple of years as well. And so this is a game changer, because we've never had to deal with non-human intelligence before. Yeah. Hollywood taught us it's going to be the aliens coming, right, that are super intelligent. But we've actually created this super intelligence ourselves.
I'm glad you mentioned Hollywood, right? So, like, I know I'm discussing from you as a futurist, you're like of a more optimistic futurist, right? Who think that, again, that we'll all have covered our basic needs for free and etc. Sure. But Hollywood, and there are some other, like the cyberpunk movies and other sci-fi movies, and then there are of course other futurists
more dystopian, right?
More dystopian, exactly. That they think that the just human nature actually will make this gap between those who have access to all the benefits of AI and the digital world will reap the huge profits, and then the people you are saying who will be able to get everything for free, maybe they will, but for example, food will not have a taste. It will just some protein mass, right? And then everyone will be dressed the same, and exactly only few who can afford will have a brighter, even like clothing and etc. What makes you believe in a human nature that will actually go in an optimistic way?
Well, let me be clear. It's not certain that we're going to have an optimistic or utopian future. There's a couple of things on the sci-fi thing. David Brin, who is a friend, he's one of the world's top sci-fi authors. We've debated this, and he says the reason Hollywood does so many dystopian movies is because it's much more expensive to produce a utopian future than to show buildings bombed out and wrecked, in a dystopian setting in Hollywood.
Interesting argument.
But it's 50-50. At this stage, it's sort of 50-50 which way we could go. I choose to be more optimistic, and I'm trying to educate the world on the possibilities. But between today and that optimistic future, there's going to be a lot of chaos. And, others have talked about it. Mo Gadat, who headed up Google in the Middle East, for example, he's been talking about this a lot recently. Geoffrey Hinton has been raising alarms about AI alignment in respect to this as well. And what we are seeing right now is that AI is accelerating gross inequality. And so the capture of wealth and assets by AI is going to create this trillionaire class, no longer just billionaires, with massive capture of wealth. And then a good depiction of this, actually realistic depiction of this, is the TV series The Expanse, a sci-fi series. And they have two classes of people, those on basic and those who have access to the assets. No one wants to be in the basic, right? You survive, you have enough food and things like that. But, in terms of your ability to travel and do other things, you have limitations. That's a probably fairly realistic depiction of what a world with capitalism continuing into this AI phase is going to look like, where you have a neo-feudalist system or a techno-feudalist system. And, this is certainly what many in America are hoping for, because they want to be in the class that has the top. But when you look at the geopolitical forces, when you look at China and Europe and other economies like India and Brazil, I'm not sure that this is a likely outcome politically, because as China's shown, they're not a fan of gross inequality like that, and they know that political stability comes with improving the quality of life of everybody. So this is the conceptual or socio-political and economic debate that we're going to have over the next 20 years. The real question is, how quickly will AI produce this type of economic collapse, large-scale technology unemployment, and will that motivate sort of large-scale political and economic reform? And AI, I hope, will be a part of that potential solution. But there's certainly going to be chaos before we get to that utopian possibility in the future, unfortunately. Because we're not very good as humans at planning for these things, Like even today, I mean, we've talked about this over the last couple of days, and many of I had someone from the court there today, one of the justices, and we were talking about this, and he was expressing how concerned he is about the disruption to the legal system that AI is going to present. Well, we know certain disruptions are coming with this, but instead of putting policy in place to anticipate these changes, we sort of wait till the disruption occurs and then we'll try and address it, right? And that's the problem that humans have in this sort of planning cycle.
Or reactive.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was you have already booked techno-socialism, so you can write another one, techno-feudalism, as contrast to that, where we'll go through.
Yanis Varoufakis, who was the Greek finance minister, I know you know him. He wrote a book on exactly this, and we debated this on my podcast. Actually,
I see.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Brett, for your insight. If you want to share with the audience last pieces of your advice or vision on the future of finance and general society, please.
Sure. Well, for sure, go and check out the Futurists, which is our podcast on the future. If you're interested in these changes, we've interviewed over 200 of the world's top futurists. We talk about this every week, and it's a great vehicle. And of course, we'll be highlighting this on Breaking Banks as well, the Fintech podcast. But before we wrap up, I'll just say maybe, how do you see Fintech changing the environment here in Astana and in Kazakhstan generally over the next few years as well?
Yeah, I think it will have a disruptive role. So, this is a hugely bank-driven economy. It is still. And then the banks play a big role. And those like Caspian Freedom have been able to kind of be ahead of those challengers and actually be the challengers themselves, and got great attention, even though they are fundamental is a traditional bank. But now more and more we see that the fintech scene here is developing and changing. I think it's like everything you've mentioned, but also it's about democratization of finance and access to capital, right? Inclusion, exactly. And we as AIFC are very open to that. That's why we came up with different types of licenses to allow these ideas, because ideas were there, but there was no legal mean to implement those ideas, just like, for example, crowdfunding. It exists for a long time, like outside, right? But in Kazakhstan, it didn't. But we introduced the license for crowdfunding. And I'm not saying that it will address all the issues, but at least it makes the capital accessible for the unbankable businesses, and these small businesses, family businesses, are very important to that particular family, right? They feed their family, they raise their kids based on that that business. But it's a very small. There is no collateral so that they can properly go a credit from the bank and etc. So I think again accessibility to capital is hugely increased by the fintechs, and especially I think the big disruption will come from the fintechs that work with the digital assets and the tokenization, because that has a huge potential of disrupting the current infrastructure of the market, the financial market, especially the securities market. It makes checking the whole system, as I say, again, based on trust, but someone has to safeguard the trust, right? But with the blockchain and distributed ledger, it kind of, the safeguard is already built in the technology, right? Of course, some people argue like this could be the case, but I'm not sure we're going to go that far. Like you come to some, let's say, small coffee shop, right? And you really like it and you want to become part of a kind of owner,
like
or
tokenized ownership.
And maybe they will not do proper IPOs, but there will be a QR that says like, if you want to become an owner, you just scan, and you if there is coins available, you just buy whatever amount you want, and you become the part of the
fractional ownership.
And then like you think, okay, what's going to happen with the traditional IPOs and all this market, right? They will stay. They will be big companies. But I think, again, this accessibility for the small, very small companies to medium companies to capital will be hugely increased. And the things that we didn't expect actually to be marketable assets will be, we're already seeing this with the fan coins, right? When you become the owner of, not owner, you kind of become related to certain sports club or to certain brand. I was like posting on my threads that maybe in the future sportsman, like young talent, he comes in, he does an ICO so that he can invest money in his proper training and etc. Then when he becomes a big star, he will share that part of that profit with you. Yeah, it's a high risk investment, but that's like a asset that needs investment. And then you can think of whole array of things that you can actually tokenize, right? So and this I think will happen on a more bigger ideas. Is like we're thinking now about tokenizing grain and commodity market again, so that the
That makes sense.
Transactional part becomes more easy, and then you can build into a smart contract different aspects, delivery points, live checking where your grain is, and etc. etc. It's like so much opportunity. So I think again, like fintechs, what we call them, they're gonna really disrupt this market, really change it and make capital so much more accessible. Transactional part already have changed with like Alipays and etc. here with the Caspian, many countries with many other means. So transactional part is definitely already happening, and it will even change more. But access to capital that's what I hope, and I think that the big changes will come.
I know we have to wrap, but I will say that one of the key messages that really resonated and was reinforced again this morning is energy transformation in order to unlock data centers and the sort of new technology infrastructure. So I think that's a positive message to take away from the AFD as well. So thank you for the opportunity to have a discussion this morning, and I've really enjoyed Astana and every success.
Thank you, brother. I mean, I hope to see you more on other platforms and other events as well.
For sure.
Again, thank you for traveling to Astana and joining us for the Astana Finance Days.
It's my honor.
Yeah, I hope you've got more insights and some ideas about Kazakhstan and the region in general. So again, thank you for coming and
very welcome
sharing your thoughts.